Lesson 7. Family Systems. History will judge us by the difference we make in the everyday lives of children. Nelson Mandela. Love is what we are born with, fear is what we learn. Marianne Williamson. The moment I could hold Emma in my arms, my immediate thoughts were, I have been given a wonderful gift from God. And how could anyone think it was okay to hurt or abuse a young baby or child? I could not fathom disciplining her that way, the way I was disciplined, out of love. I was moved to tears. To see and feel the vulnerability of this precious child was overwhelming. I had another profound thought. Her life is in my hands. I am responsible for her care. She could literally die if I did not give her the attention, care and love she needed. The responsibility of that moment created a physical change within me. My role was to do anything to protect her. My heart still skips a beat when I think of those first words I uttered to her when she was in her incubator in NICU, and how she responded. Her little arms and legs went crazy just hearing my voice. From the second a child is born, it is absorbing its new surroundings. Their environment and the way children are parented forms their core beliefs about themselves. Touch, nurturing and interactions with their main carers, nothing could be more important, because families are the source of our first relationships. History tells us that children such as the Romanian children in care and children in orphanages that are not held, rocked or shown touch won't grow. In fact, they can die, and have died. These children I'm talking about had a roof over their head, they had clothing and they had food, but they did not have physical touch from their caregiver. As Dr. Bruce Perry explains, children need their parents continuously throughout childhood. Parents teach their children the meaning of the world around them. For the past 45 years, it has shown us how families influence us and our self-esteem. We learn from our parents, then we invent, and we pass on what we learn to the next generation. If we do not know our family history, we may be doomed to repeat the same mistakes, such as beliefs, values, and parenting systems that are not helpful for our emotional well-being or our relationships. Most of the parenting rules came from an era where every adult had to be obeyed, which was mirrored from kingly authority. We still have strong patriarchal and matriarch systems in our current life in legal and school systems. Family systems become chronically dysfunctional, not because of bad people, but because of bad information loops. If you had parents that were born before the Second World War, you were probably affected by the rules set up at the time. The future of our world depends on what a child's conceptions are of themselves and their views of themselves. Carl Jung once said, "The most damaging thing to any family is the unlived lives of their parents." In my era, you never talked back or questioned ahead at school, because if you did, it would be look out. It would be double punishment. Punishment from the teacher, then punishment at home. As a 10-year-old, I remember one of my male teachers throwing chalk and dusters at kids looking in their desk while he was talking, at full force for not paying attention. Some teachers even acted as if they were God, with the attitude, I'm in charge and I can do whatever I please. I remember in class one particular day, in our social studies segment, we were discussing the Aberfan disaster, a terrible disaster that happened in South Wales. My ears pricked up because I had family in Scotland. My uncle Stuart helped pull out many of the children that died in this disaster due to an unstable coal tip that slid down the hill and engulfed the school. Teachers and children were buried under the coal. I started whispering this account to my friend sitting next to me. You guessed it, I got caught talking. I was normally that girl in the class that didn't say boo to a goose. Before I knew it, I was marched up the front of the classroom to get the strap. It was an evil-looking strap. It had thin strips at the end. The teacher would step back and launch the strap onto your hand. I had seen this technique applied to other students before me. Their faces said it all. I was the first girl to get the strap in that class. I held out my hand and I looked at him straight in the eyes. As he was about to whack me, I remember saying to myself, "You bastard. May God forgive you and myself." I couldn't use my hand for the rest of the day and my wrist stung from where the leather tethers met. I felt like the teacher got some sort of sick pleasure from hurting you. I can just hear Matthew Perry from Friends saying, "Could he have been any meaner?" It didn't stop there. There was a boy in my class who was left-handed. He was always being whacked over the knuckles with a ruler so that he would write with his right hand. How this sort of punishment or abuse was supposed to make you a better person or have any respect for a person in authority made no sense to me. But I think the biggest disgrace is the adults that were in a place of trust who were supposed to be God's representatives, such as some religious leaders, nuns and priests. In my opinion, this betrayal is unforgivable. As we know now, many children have suffered terribly at the hands of people they thought could be trusted and have endured many wicked things that were carried out in the name of God. And to add insult to injury, when they did have the courage to speak up about this trauma, they were punished further for lying, as it was unthinkable that someone in such a position of trust could act in such a way. For many survivors, the psychological damage is such they will never fully recover from these atrocities. Parenting rules. In her book, For Your Own Good, The Roots of Violence in Child Rearing, child psychologist Alice Miller talks about the parenting rules that were used to condition a child at a very young age so that they remained unaware of what was really being done to him or her. These parenting rules are referred to as poisonous pedagogy, a term used to describe attitudes towards children. One of the patriarchal methods of keeping children in their place was shaming punishment. This toxic shame not only damaged my own self-esteem, but many others. It harms the child psychologically and physically. Alice Miller calls this process out as soul murder. Here are some of the rules of past child rearing that you may be able to relate to. Parents were honoured and obeyed as if they were God. Children were never allowed to raise their voices or express anger towards their parents. Both father and mother had the right to hit and spank their children. Anger in children were especially forbidden and punished. Children should speak only when spoken to. Sex and genitals were shamed, and heaven forbid if you even ask about sex. Children should be seen and not heard. To question is an act of disobedience, and so the rules are carried out. One of the rules is that the rules cannot be challenged. We are not supposed to notice and have developed a no-talk rule. Children should obey all adults without question. Children are not allowed to say no. Does any of these rules stir some uncomfortable feelings for you? Or maybe some bad memories? They did for me. Research over the past 50 years has shown that these rules, although well-intended, have had a huge physical and psychological effect on many of the adults today. John Bradshaw, therapist, author and theologian, said in his book, John Bradshaw on the Family, "If you want to set a child up for molestation, teach them that. Teach them to obey any or all adults. I talk to molesters who have told me that. They look for the most obedient child in the playground, the child that is the neediest and the child that is the most obedient. Children need to learn to say no," he further states. It is important to know that no should be celebrated, just like when our child took their first step, when they said their first word, because when they say no, they are becoming a person. This is a little person looking up at a giant saying, "No," or "It's mine." How many times have we read or heard on the news of the young innocent lives that have been damaged by people who were put in a position of trust or authority that have now been exposed for their vile acts? They got away with it because they had power over a child, knowing that a child was told that they must obey anyone in authority, and they had no right to say no to an adult. These were children preyed upon both by family members, church leaders, or others in authority. The most disturbing side of this exposure is that even though these children had an icky feeling and knew inside that what these adults were doing was wrong, they still felt at some degree that they were to blame for having this done to them. So to drown or cover their pain, they developed a false sense of self in order to survive. The false self forms a defensive mask, distracting the true self from its pain and inner loneliness. The toll to the child is that after years of acting, performing, and pretending, the child loses contact with their true self, and that true self is numbed out. Once a person loses contact with their own feelings, he or she loses contact with their body, and when a child does this to protect themselves, the downward spiral begins. They will often have difficulty learning and struggle at school, which leads to behaviour problems, and then in adulthood they will be drawn to abusive relationships because it is safe. It is what is familiar to the brain. All of us tend to gravitate towards the familiar. Even when the familiar is unhealthy or destructive, we are drawn to what we are raised with. We must learn from this. If we cannot become children when we are children, we become adult children. We have to stop promoting family rules that destroy the self-esteem of our little people. A major cause of concern in our society today is that we have a large number of people who look like adults, talk and dress like adults, but who actually are adult children. And these adult children are everywhere in society. Inside these adults is a hurt child, and people who are hurting transmit their hurt onto others. Why? This is because their developmental needs were not met as children. In a nutshell, children were not allowed to be children. Building emotional intimacy. The level of emotional intimacy with ourselves is only the level of emotional intimacy we can have with others. Wendy B. King. Emotional intimacy, whether it's with friends, family, or intimate partners, is about being present with them and them with you, even when it is challenging or you are in a disagreement. It is also about being able to handle disagreements without walking away from them, rejecting them, judging them, or trying to shame them. Focus on the behaviour, not the person. Be the safe place your special someone can be without threat or withdrawal or condemnation. What is intimacy? Being available, responsive, open, and fighting for your dreams. Saying, I love you is not enough. You have to show me. Love has to be expressed. That takes courage, being vulnerable and open to rejection. It is knowing how to handle conflict. It is knowing how to be gentle and compassionate. You do not need to be right all the time. It requires saying sorry and thank you. It only takes one to start playing a new game. The recipe of love requires a lot of ingredients. Dr. John Gottman says, in relationships, you need a habit of mind that scans the world for things to appreciate rather than things to criticise. So now is the time for us to break free and question these rules and stop our pain being transmitted to the next generation. But to do this, we first need to 1. Learn and educate ourselves on how children learn and develop. Children can only do or learn at age-specific stages. We need a better understanding of the developmental stages that form their solid self-esteem. 2. Grown adults that have been scarred by child abuse need help and better education on how to work on themselves to resolve issues that still haunt them and are carried with them on a daily basis. 3. Learn what love is and what emotional intimacy looks like. Anyone who does not have a solid sense of self-esteem will have trouble forming intimate bonds with a partner. We need to know how to take care of ourselves before we can take care of others. It is not selfish taking care of your needs. The truth is, many feel guilty about taking care of themselves. We need to re-educate ourselves. Once you know what happened to you, you can do something about it. Martin Luther King said, "The ultimate tragedy is not the oppression and cruelty by the bad people, but the silence over that by the good people." The good news is that this can happen. Your brain is malleable and you can heal from these bad memories. You can do this by working with someone who has been there where you have been and has done the work. If you don't get help, you will continue to be plagued by those inner voices that tell you that you're not good enough. It doesn't have to be this way.